It's the final countdown. We're coming down the home stretch here, and this is the Fantasy Slant, powered by PFF Radio and brought to you by DraftKings.com. I'm your host, Jeff Ratcliffe. The final countdown, indeed, it is Wednesday, the 29th of April, which means that, well, everything is the excitement is at the peak level. The rumors are floating around. Lies are all over the place. You can't believe a word that you're hearing now in the major media. But it's an exciting time for football fans. It's an exciting time for fantasy football players as well. So we're going to talk about some of this NFL draft. So with me is verified on Twitter, Mike Clay. Mike, what's going on today?
Oh, keep him busy, Jeff. I want to say I'm excited for the draft because we won't have to listen to Marcus Mariota rumors anymore in the Philly market. But, I don't know if the draft will stop him. We might be hearing about these for years to come right now. We still hear the Deion Jordan rumors, and he was drafted the first year Chip Kelly came into the league. He's, of course, gone for the year now. But, I don't know if this Mariota stuff's ever going to stop. But nonetheless, I'm excited, to go from studying these guys actually placing them on a roster and figuring out the fantasy implications.
Yeah, it's always fun. And you mentioned the Deion Jordan, a diluted sample, and now this is the third violation here of substance abuse. So he is good for the year. There was rumors that he would be reunited with Chip Kelly as far back as April. There were trade talks. I mean, we've been hearing this since Deion Jordan was drafted, so it's not that big of a surprise to hear that again. But Mariota, we're hearing Mariota talk nonstop. It's been Mariota talk in Philadelphia since the end of the football season. And, that's the big rumor mill, is really it's circling around that second pick and what's going to play out there. But ultimately, whatever plays out, we know Winston, we know that Mariota, they are going to be fantasy relevant players. But I want to kind of go through the positions today. And we're not going to obviously spend a lot of time on the quarterback position, but maybe we should lead there since we've talked about Mariota and Winston on this show before. We're not going to rehash that. If you want to go back, you can certainly please go back if you haven't listened to the other episodes. They're still very relevant here until after this weekend when everything goes back in the hopper and we start to redo everything. Other quarterbacks stand out to you? Because there's a couple players in this draft who are getting talked about. There's one player in particular who stands out to me as somebody who could be fantasy viable, but I want to throw it over to you first. Any of these quarterbacks that you're looking at maybe might have value, take a swing at them if they land in the right spot in a dynasty draft.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly there's the two headliners. Probably we know Jameis Winston's going to go number one to Tampa Bay. You hear the Big Ben comparisons, on NBC Sports Network the other night. We had the PFF draft show with our PFF main crew. Steve compared him to Matt Ryan a little bit with his anticipation. So, there's a lot to like about him. There's also some concerns considering how poorly he played last year and down the stretch, and even in the second half of the 2013 season. But, nonetheless, I think he's a very interesting rookie fantasy quarterback because of his weapons. You look at Mike Evans, you look at Vincent Jackson, and even emerging Austin Seferian-Jenkins at tight end. Winston's a big guy like Big Ben. He's going to be able to elude defenders in the pocket and avoid some sacks, developing time for these 6'5" wide receivers to get open downfield. So I think, and we've talked about this, like you said, he's one of the few rookie quarterbacks that could potentially throw for 4,000 yards. Mariota on the other side, I think if he lands in a place like Tennessee, where he can start week one, I think his floor is probably a little bit higher just because he's going to get those yards with his legs. He's like a Colin Kaepernick. He's going to be able to run the ball well. He's probably a better passer as well. I just think, especially in those leagues where it's 4 points for a passing touchdown, I think that he's going to make up a lot of that with his legs, and that really brings up his floor. I think both of these guys you have to look at as quarterback twos right out of the gate. And, you could talk about these other guys, the Brett Hundleys, Bryce Petty, Garrett Grayson, Sean Mannion, and some of these other guys that are going to be drafted. I think it's unlikely that any of them are going to start week one. Maybe they get a shot during the season. But, hey, you never know. If a guy takes – if a team trades up for a guy like Hundley or Petty, they're going to get a shot to unseat the starter. There are other teams out there who need starting quarterbacks, and on top of Tampa Bay, Tennessee could potentially take Mariota, Cleveland, Buffalo, and nobody's talking about Houston too. They're probably a little bit of an underdog to grab a quarterback. I mean, they have Mallett, they have Hoyer, both of those quarterbacks not very good or at least unproven, so they're probably a little bit of an underdog right now as well.
Yeah, and talk about these guys too. One of the things maybe we haven't said about Mariota before is that he actually was a pretty good deep passer. We recorded all the plays from last season at PFF, the college football focused division. And this guy completed 50% of his passes traveling 20 yards or more. Now, that's something we don't hear a lot out of Mariota. The talk is, he gets plays done with his legs, but he can also sling the rock if the system is right. The name you mentioned, though, for me would be Brett Hundley. Watching this guy a little bit more, in the past few weeks, he's very accurate, surprisingly accurate. He was just as accurate as Mariota was. Only one draft eligible quarterback was more accurate than both of those players, and he's not going to get picked. So you have that factor. You have the legs. And I think, the other thing that's interesting about Hundley is he's not really at his ceiling. I mean, that's not really what you want to hear out of a quarterback. You want that quarterback to come in the league polished up, ready to go out there and play. But Hundley's intriguing for me. He's the only other player I ranked out of my top 50 pre-draft players that's a quarterback. I'm not high on Petty. I know some people are. That offense is an offense that is designed to put up numbers, right, at Baylor there. So I'm not really that high on that kid for fantasy purposes at least. But Hundley's maybe the only other fantasy relevant guy, and it's really top heavy with those first two. But
and keep in mind at Mariota, I mean, just before you swap positions there, Mariota, Winston. Mariota, he ranked way ahead of Winston in the PFF ratings. I mean, he was way ahead. Number one quarterback last year. Winston was average at best last year. We didn't like him very much. Certainly, when I say we, I mean the guys grading the games at CFF. So there are plenty of concerns about him because, as Neil pointed out on the show the other night, Winston, first half of 2013, outstanding football. Second half, tailed off a little bit. 2014, not very good. He just was not very good last year. He threw a lot of bad interceptions. People say some of them weren't his fault, but there was other passes he threw right to defenders that were dropped. So there are serious concerns about Winston. Some people, it's funny, you see the marketplace out there, if you will, the people on Twitter who some people just won't even consider him. They just say he's a bust. Like, this is terrible. We don't understand why he's number one. Some people more, have studied the tape more than others, of course, but, there are reasons to be concerned, and it shows in our ratings of this player. So the ceiling's high in Winston, but I think the floor with him is very, very low.
I mean, to be fair, there's a little bit to be left to be desired with the receivers last year. I mean, Rashad Green was his best, and anybody who watched the NFL draft camp or whatever that's called on ESPN at the pro day, Rashad Green's dropping balls. He's making Jameis look bad to a degree. I mean, the balls were put where they should be, and he's dropping balls. So something to consider as well when we get to that wide receiver position. I think according to our CFF analyst, Rashad Green is about as ordinary as they come. Nothing extraordinary about him from a football standpoint. So something to consider there. But by the way, too, if you watch that PFF special on NBC, if you haven't, it's awesome. It's cool to see it all laid out in one format. They explain everything because I know, if you're listening to this show, PFF, but you know that a lot of people aren't familiar with what we do, especially on the main side with grading. But Mike, Steve Palazzolo is one tall guy. Holy cow. Chris Collinsworth is 6'5". He made Chris Collinsworth look like a little boy.
Yeah,
it's wild.
Yeah, that was good. And Steve and Sam and Neil did a great job. You kind of alluded to it. They started off by kind of explaining the process at PFF, kind of touched on the new grading system or the tweaked grading system that's going to be easier for everyone to understand. And they did a great job with it. So I recommend it. They went through pretty much all the important positions, especially featuring edge rushers, quarterbacks, wide receivers. and corners. So it's outstanding. I learned a lot. I know a lot about the PFF. What goes on and which players we like, which we don't. And I learned a lot. So they did a great job. And I definitely recommend checking it out.
And Steve has a great nickname. I guess he was a minor league baseball player before being one of our analysts. And one of the nicknames I saw, because I looked, I was like, I got to find out how tall this guy is. So somebody called him the Leaning Tower of Pitcher, which I think is pretty awesome. You know what else is awesome? That's a segue there, right? Is Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley's awesome. Todd Gurley is, no question, the best offensive prospect for fantasy purposes in this draft when healthy. And he's scheme independent. He doesn't need to be just in a zone block. He can play anywhere. Whoever drafts him, I have no doubt that he's going to be fantasy stud in the years to come. I'm not quite certain about Melvin Gordon. I do have him highly ranked. Mike, I'm sure that you either had Gordon or Gurley as your top running back, but I think we should dig a little bit deeper because most people aren't lucky enough to have that first, second, third pick in their rookie drafts. So where do you see the rest of the value? Any players stick out to you maybe in that tier right below Gurley and Gordon, who especially in a good landing spot might be somebody who you'd really be high on?
Yeah, and quickly to touch on those guys, I think you want to go Gurley first. I mean, he was on a torrid pace last year, got injured. Gordon ended up as as PFF's top incoming or top overall running back, if you will. He was just outstanding. One concern with Gurley, probably blocking. Coming off the injury, he's not a very good blocker. Is he going to be out there all 3 downs? Probably not. He has a while to go there, but highest upside there for sure. So I do have Gurley first, Gordon second. I think after that, I mean, you have a pretty lengthy tier, I would say, of kind of intriguing players, and I think that's okay. I think that they're going to kind of move around based on where these guys land. Gurley, Gordon, that's going to knock out 2 teams that have a big need at running back. So, but there's a long list of them: Arizona, Jacksonville, Dallas, San Diego, Atlanta. For sure, need an impact running back, and then there's a long list of teams who need maybe a 2016 lead back or a committee back, that kind of thing. So. We'll see where these guys land. But Amir Abdullah, I currently have him number 3. Tevin Coleman, I like him a lot. I mean, I know there's some concerns about him. Certainly as a pass catcher, that's a concern. Is he a 3-down option? He's very elusive. He's a big play machine. He has some size to him, very much like a Murray or a McFadden. And he's, a team that's looking for an explosive player is going to go out and bring him in. So I think I like him a little bit more than most. And then, Duke Johnson, TJ Yeldon, they're probably round out that tier. And, forgive me, the kid from Boise State, Jay, how do you pronounce that? What is it?
Ajayi.
Ajayi. Okay. Well, there you go.
Ajayi. Yep.
I said it wrong. I said that name wrong last night on Sirius XM, and I meant to look it up and totally forgot. So, but anyway, I think those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think those 5 guys kind of, fit in that second tier. And I think all those will probably land at one of the teams I mentioned. If they don't, it's going to be interesting to see if anyone after that, Jabarius Allen, David Cobb, Jeremy Langford, one of those guys ends up on one of these teams with a big need at running back. You can end up seeing people reach for them in dynasty drafts. But it's a really, it is one of the deeper running back groups we've seen this year or over the last decade at least.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's the year and probably the perfect time when running back has been on the decline in the league. Just overall how it's been valued. So we have this awesome class. Now I'm in the same boat. I have all those same players in that second tier. I have Ajayi at the top of that tier only because he is the most versatile, probably most ready to play 3 downs out of those guys. He's an awesome receiver, one of the better receivers in the FBS last year. But the knee concern certainly is an issue. We'll see how that impacts his draft day. I don't see him sliding past the 2, but if he does, that's a big red flag. You mentioned Coleman. I had this in my rookie rankings. He had 1,156 of his 2,028 yards on runs of 15 yards or more. That's insane production. But the one knock on him is he going to run – his pad level, is going to run like an NFL runner. I always think of the quintessential NFL runner, somebody like Frank Gore. You watch him play, the pad level so low. Whereas a player like Yeldon's going to run very high, like you mentioned, Darren McFadden, and that doesn't always bode positively for their NFL stock. I still am really big on Duke, though. I do like Duke. He's not, a bigger player. One of the small backs. We see a lot of backs who are big in this draft, over 6 feet tall. A lot of these guys. Duke is not, but he's explosive. He, can catch out of the backfield, and he might be one of those underrated players. And the beauty to this, Mike, is you take all these guys, and what I equate them to is like, you're playing like Parcheesi or something like that. You got that little cup. You put the dice in, and all these players are in that cup. And when you roll this out, some of them are going to be snake eyes, where some of them are going to be those big number 6s that you want, the high scoring. And we're going to see such a significant change as we get into, Sunday when we sit down and really start to iron out our post-draft rankings. There's going to be a significant change with these guys. And right now, guys who I have outside my top 10, maybe in the top 5 potentially, if not certainly in the top 10, based on those landing spots. But you mentioned a couple players deeper down the list. And I'm looking there, and you still keep going further and further down. I think you mentioned Cobb. Another player who a lot of people are high on is the kid out of northern Iowa, David Johnson, another big back, showed some speed at the combine, can do things that that you want out of a 3-down player. You can catch the ball, he can run between the tackles. He's intriguing. Cobb's intriguing. Cobb causing all these missed tackles at the collegiate level, and despite not seemingly being that type of player. So, if I had to pick somebody, it's David Johnson out of that next tier. Does any player particularly stand out to you out of the tier 3 guys?
Yeah, I think Cobb, I'm probably end up a little bit low on. I mean, he's just such a horrible blocker. He's not a very good receiver. I think he kind of has a way to go. He ran a 4.81. I mean, the guy's slow as well. I just think he's probably a long way off and kind of destined to be kind of a committee back. David Johnson, I mean, everyone, not everyone, but I've seen the connection or the comparison to Charles Sims. He's going to come in the same kind of way. You're going to hear all through the preseason and training camp and all that he's going to kind of be that 3rd down back. He's going to settle in as a passing down back. He's not he doesn't have a lot of long speed. He's big. He's 6'3", 225. He's not a great runner from what we've seen overall. He's underwhelmed, I guess, is probably the best in games that PFF has charted nonetheless. But he is an outstanding receiver, probably the best receiving back incoming this year, and we'll see how good of a blocker is he in camp and that kind of thing. Of course, he's coming from northern Iowa, so not a ton of tape on the CFF level there, but he looks like one of those guys that would settle in nicely behind a guy that's not going to do a lot on passing downs. Maybe even Washington. A nice fit there, replacing Roy Halou. Or, and this is something I think often we forget about, the possibility that a team comes out that has a running back need and takes 2 guys. So, maybe a team comes out and is able to grab Yeldon and then comes back with David Johnson. I mean, imagine that combination. Yeldon on early downs, and at the goal line, David Johnson handles passing downs. I mean, you could see something like that develop here. And, I'm intrigued to see where he lands, just because I think Johnson, he may not do a ton with his legs on early downs, but I think in PPR, he could always flirt with PPR numbers if he lands in the right spot.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, kind of like a poor man, or not even a poor man. It would be somewhat equivalent to what we saw Cleveland do last year. I mean, now they didn't draft Isaiah Crowell. He was a unsigned or undrafted rookie free agent. But you still had that dynamic of the 2 younger players kind of duking it out and then potentially carving out different roles with each other. I actually heard something really interesting. It was Ian Rappaport and Daniel Jeremiah talking, and they mentioned Cleveland as a landing spot for Gurley, which would just throw everything into craziness, madness there. Like, so Wes Crowell, Gurley all in the same spot. If that happened, that would be really – but it wouldn't surprise me, because nothing surprises me, especially on day 1 of the NFL draft. Cobb, just to solidify what you were saying there, in grading pass blocking efficiency, he was 55th out of 59 in qualifiers in pass blocking efficiency. So that's not going to get you on the field early and often at the NFL level. couple other players that we didn't mention, Mike, before we maybe move on to another stacked wide receiver class. Carlos Williams out of Florida State, I think, is an interesting player. Now, obviously, he had a pretty big first season with Florida State. They won the national championship that year, scored 11 touchdowns. But then he scored 11 again last year, though his yards per carry dipped to just 4.48. That's not what you want to see. But why he's intriguing to me, Mike, is you look to that combine time, he runs a 4.48. Or I'm sorry, what did I said 4.48 is his yards per carry. His yards per carry was 4.6. I'll have to look that one up. He runs 4.48. That would be awesome if it was the exact same as his 40 time. He runs 4.48 at the combine. That number really sticks out to me. When you see a running back go sub 4.5, that's somebody who, let's face it, in the late rounds of a rookie draft, especially if you're like our fantasy staff league, it's a dynasty league with IDP, so there's more rookie picks than what you'd see in a typical draft. And a lot of folks will just go offensive heavy. So you're still snagging offensive players later on in that draft. I mean, I'd rather roll the dice on somebody like that where there is upside. He's probably closer to his floor than to his ceiling. But I'd rather roll the dice on somebody like that. Is there anybody at the sort of bottom ends of your rookie rankings that stick out like Carlos Williams does to me?
Well, you kind of stole mine. I mean, I don't know how good Williams will be, but I feel like at least rookie year, if he lands in the right place, you're looking at kind of an Alfred Blue type producer. I mean, hopefully a little better. Blue obviously wasn't very good last year. And I think Houston will probably look for a number 2 back behind Foster in the draft. They did just sign Chris Polk, who I'm a fan of. He could be an option there. How about Terrell Watson, Azusa Pacific? He's big, he's fast, he was productive at that level. Obviously not a D1 back, but he's kind of a deep sleeper to keep an eye on. And I just really quick touch on some guys who didn't really show well. I know Matt Jones is kind of a popular name. He went to Florida. He has the name because he played at such a big school. He's a big running back, but he's a guy I think it's probably safe to ignore. He was very bad last year in pretty much every area. He rated out poorly as a runner, as a receiver, as a blocker, really bad as a blocker. I've seen him kind of compared to Alex Green. I mean, that doesn't say a lot about him. So, I think that's kind of one of the names that's going to land maybe in the 3rd, 4th round of rookie drafts if he lands in a good spot. And that's probably a name to ignore. Instead, to go with guys like Mike Davis, Josh Robinson, Cameron Artis-Payne, guys like that who, aren't getting talked about too much, but, are going to land in a situation where probably get some a role that's progressively increases as the season goes on.
Yeah, Artis-Payne actually is interesting. In both of our rookie mocks, Scott Spratt has taken Artis-Payne later in the draft. 4.53 40 time. I mean, and obviously, he had a pretty big year last year. Went over 1,600 yards, 13 touchdowns. So he's an interesting player too. And these are the guys you never know. You can certainly roll the dice on these players, especially when those rookie drafts take place in May. You don't even have any camp information there, so roll the dice on these guys. And if the best part about it though is when you roll the dice, hey, you can cut them loose and then you can pick up a free agent because you're going to need to pick up free agents anyway, or you could taxi squad them if it's that type of league. And Mike, Azusa Pacific, it's like one of those when I first was looking up all the players in Watson, I was like, that's not real. They're making that up. But Christian Okoye went there. How about that? The probably most famous Azusa Pacific, well, at least NFL alumni. It's probably the only other NFL alumni. I'm probably wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, please, folks. On Twitter, hit me up. But pretty cool stuff there. Some of these smaller school guys getting an opportunity to get up and possibly play with the big boys.
Yeah,
if you want to play with the big boys. Oh, Mike, you're going to step on I'm going to do my commercial read real quick.
Yeah, that has to wait one more second. Yeah, sometimes when I'm comparing to these guys, we're not too familiar with them. We're trying to find, who are the player comparisons? Who do they remind you of? And some, they're popular. You hear Gurley is, compared to Lynch, Gordon to Charles, that kind of thing. But, I like to go down the list and think about not only what sort of player are they in terms of size, speed, or how good they are blocking, that kind of thing. But, what kind of role can we expect them to play? What are they going to come in and struggle at, and where are they going to land? And, I'm backtracking a little bit to David Cobb here. The player that jumped out at me just going over him over and over again was what Andre Williams did last year, essentially. You know, if he lands in a spot there with a weak running back group, which there's a lot of teams out there like that, he may be forced into a role where he has to be an early down back. But, you know, I just don't think he's going to be effective. So, you know, like an Alfred Blue or an Andre Williams, a guy who's going to really struggle. Actually, I'm not really sure how Blue did as a blocker, but certainly Williams, not a good blocker, not a good receiver. And Cobb kind of fits that mold. So that's kind of what you can expect from him. I'm surprised I haven't heard that comparison of him yet, just because of how he is built and how, you know, the areas he struggled. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of mention that on Cobb. He's one of them guys that could steal some fantasy value based on where he lands, but I just don't think much of him.
It's just really it's crazy when you look at the 61 missed tackles he caused. That's the third most in the FBS draft eligible running back. So I don't know. I mean, that's probably a good comparison, though. If he gets in there, he could do a little bit of damage, but he's going to really have a hard time being on the field for all 3 downs, that for sure.
And that was what people said with Williams last year, too, about how dominant he was at the collegiate level as a runner, and that was going to offset everything else. And it certainly did not. I mean, Williams was not good last year, and you know, it wouldn't surprise me if the Giants made an impact draft pick at that running back position, even after signing Shane Vereen. Yeah.
Shane Vereen, another player who hasn't been able to play 3 downs. At least he didn't in New England. I don't see that happening now, but look at the Giants at 9. I mean, if Gurley's there, it's going to be one of those drafts, I think, where we look back and we're going to say, like, how did all of these teams, I'm hoping at least, how did all these teams pass up on Todd Gurley? You know, just the same way we look back at that Peterson draft. How did all these teams pass up on Peterson?
Chip Kelly. He's going to trade up, and we're going to think he's taking Mariota, and he's going to take Todd Gurley. They're going to run every play.
They're not going to take Marcus Smith again.
Yeah.
Wait, again? Is he eligible again? All right. Let's put him in there. Yeah, boy. Well, we're trading all over. We're going to have 12 first-round picks in Philadelphia by the end of this, according to Sports Talk Radio. So, all right, take 2 on the commercial, because we have a great sponsor, DraftKings.com, and I want to tell you a little bit about them because baseball season is finally here. It is back. You wouldn't know about that, though, if you're a football fan, but it is back, and if you're a fantasy fan, you might be playing fantasy baseball. Well, there's huge cash prizes being won every single day over at DraftKings.com. It is the official daily fantasy sports partner of Major League Baseball. There's no season-long commitments. You know this. Why would you wait until the end of the season to win when you can win every day? Mike, I talked about this last time. The seasonal baseball leagues, if you play fantasy football, they're running right into draft season, and you can't even concentrate in your playoffs. Here, it's a new season every single day. You're not stuck with injured players. You pick 2 pitchers, 8 position players. You stay under that cap, and you can win cash. You win lots of cash. In fact, Peter Jennings last year, he won $1 million playing fantasy baseball, and he's winning elsewhere too. So you can play you don't have to just play baseball. You can play football, basketball, hockey, golf. There's all of these great sports that you can play. Hundreds of thousands of people just like you are winning all the time at DraftKings. So hurry up and get there. DraftKings.com. Use the promo code PFF to play for free. You're going to have a chance of winning a part of $300 million being paid out during this baseball season. DraftKings.com, the official partner of Major League Baseball. Use that promo code PFF to play for free. It's a free entry right now, DraftKings.com. That's DraftKings.com. I didn't screw it up this week, Mike. I think I did a little bit better. Let's do a whole lot better, and let's get into these receivers. Oh boy.
Speaking of a guy who doesn't make many mistakes.
Yeah, well, right at the top there. Yeah, absolutely. Probably one of the more polished and intriguing receivers in this draft, Amari Cooper. And this top tier is interesting. So maybe we'll just go with these top tier guys. So there's sort of 3 different types of players. Cooper, polished, silky smooth. White, the explosive, big, nasty. And then Parker's got a little bit of it too. He's got that side speed. He's more like the after the catch ability guy. So what are your thoughts on these top 3 before we even roll up our sleeves and get into the rest of this class?
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit right out of the gate, I kind of struggled with Cooper versus White. I mean, Cooper, it's easy, especially after all the research I did on the offseason about how important size is to touchdown opportunities. White, of course, he ran almost a full tenth of a second faster in the 40. He's 2 inches taller. He's a few extra pounds on him. Amari Cooper has some problems in the blocking department, whereas Kevin White's pretty good there. But at the end of the day, Amari Cooper is just a terrific receiver. He's outstanding. I think he's going to come right in, settle in as a starter, and make an immediate impact. Almost probably as a number one receiver. You think about a guy like Mike Evans or Sammy Watkins or Odell Beckham once he joined the team last year. How much of an impact they made. Cooper can do that. He can be that good. He has that all around ability to be an elite receiver at the NFL level. So I think he's arguably the number one overall pick in dynasty leagues. And then White, I mean, and again, I'm kind of stealing from the show the other night, but they said it the best. He has the higher ceiling, I'd say, just because he has the height and the speed. If he puts it all together, he can be, an absolute superstar. But again, the floor is probably a little bit lower. And you mentioned Parker. Again, he's like Cooper in the sense that he's an overall just great player. He's actually a little bit bigger than Cooper, but all around does pretty much everything well. And then I think you have to include one more in there. I think many would think about Jalen Strong, but I would say Dorial Green-Beckham. I mean, he didn't play last year, so not many, people still talk about him, but he doesn't really get, there's I guess he's considered riskier is probably the best way to put it with the off the field stuff, that kind of thing. But, he runs a 4.4, he's 6'5", 237. He's one of the biggest incoming wide receivers. He's going to do a ton of damage down the field. You hear those Plaxico Burress comparisons. And he has that height and that size very much like a Mike Evans. So if he lands in the right place, Philadelphia, I know that Chip Kelly's all about the avoiding off the field drama, all that kind of stuff. But Green Beckham, I mean, he is just an ideal fit for that offense, I think. So I'm really intrigued with him, and I think he has that high ceiling, like a Kevin White, that he belongs in that top tier as well.
Yeah, see, I think the off the field just keeps him out of my top tier, but I think that's fair. He's at the top of that. I have him as my number 7 overall player, and he's right at that breaking point after Parker. Parker coming in as my number 5. But it's interesting when you look at the draft order here, and you see, okay, well, where could these players fall? Where are they going to come off the board? Cooper. Could he come off the board at 3? That'd be a little strange, but I mean, again, stranger things can happen if he goes to Jacksonville. Possibly 4. I don't know about 5. I don't know if he makes it to that point. 7 is where the odds makers are saying that White is going 7. He's going to Chicago. That's what everybody. You're not the over under for every other player is actually like a half. It's 7 for White. So that's intriguing. Then where does Parker? Does Parker go at 11? Does he go back to hanging out with Teddy? That could be very interesting as well. So then you have these players, Green Beckham. You have James Strong. You have Nelson Aguilar, who is another who I actually really like. He's the player who I think probably might be the best fit for the Eagles because of how scheme versatile he is. He can play inside. He can play outside. He's got blazing speed. He is pretty polished as well. And then you have Perryman, so here's that next tier. Perryman, a big guy, another one of these bigger size receivers who is fast. A lot of people looking at that tape of Blake Bortles last year, and they're seeing this kid Perryman, like, who is this guy? When is he draft eligible? So those players are really intriguing to me. Now, Green Beckham, it's tough. Because I'll admit, I didn't get to evaluate a lot of him because there just isn't a lot of tape on him, especially from last year, right? But I did get to look a lot of stuff, both numbers and tape stuff with Strong, with Perryman, with Aguilar, and they do come in that order. Though the thing about these guys, Mike, these guys all could go in the first round very easily. And I think, if I remember correctly, the mock draft that CFF put out, they all did go in that first round. But the thing about those later players is they're going to go in that 20 to 32 range if they do go in the first round, which means, okay, you get paired up with some of these quarterbacks in this range. I'm looking down the list on my screen right now. That's really intriguing. And so these players could almost, they don't maybe leapfrog the top three, but they pull a lot closer based on those landing spots.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I mean, Perriman's intriguing because he has the size 6'3" and he ran a sub 4'3". I mean, that really makes him interesting. People talk about his route running and is how well is he going to block? How good are his hands? He obviously had drop issues there. I saw some talk about that today. Some analysts saying shouldn't be too big of a concern. It probably should be. I mean, you look at PFF, he definitely shows up as kind of a mediocre overall producer relative to the rest of the incoming wide receivers, and obviously drops were an issue. Jalen Strong, he has to be right there with Green Beckham. He's 6'4", 217. He has the size that coaches are going to use downfield or certainly at the goal line. And Green Beckham is the same kind of thing. I mean, regardless of what sort of role he lands, he's going to be involved at the goal line. I mean, there aren't many 6'5", 237 wide receivers out there. It seems like maybe if you start counting, I mean, you get to the Benjamins, Jackson, Evans, those kind of guys, the list that dries up fast. There's just not many of them. So he's going to be drafted probably in, I would guess, round 2, maybe the tail end of round 1. And he's going to be involved at the goal line. He could be a guy who scores 6-7 touchdowns right out of the gate and then average, upwards of 10 in a great offense for a long time. So he's a guy I can't wait to see where he lands. You mentioned some other guys. I think you kind of have this trifecta of deep speedsters / returners / undersized guys, and that's Tyler Lockett, Devin Smith, Philip Dorsett. I saw Dorsett, I think, in the Mel and Mock draft where he went like 15 or something. That seems obscenely early to me, but the guy has the speed, and some people like him. I think he's probably going to go earlier than we realize. There's all it takes is one team to really like him as the next, maybe T.Y. Hilton, that kind of player, for him to go early. And Devin Smith, everyone talks about his ball tracking. He has almost 4.3 wheels, just missed the cut there. Blocking's probably going to be concerned, but he has the upside to be a Deshaun Jackson, a Torrey Smith, that kind of player. And he's not too undersized. He's 6'1", sort of in the middle of the pack there. So not too on the small side. And then Lockett, he graded out extremely well at PFF last year. I should say CFF. I think Cooper was the only receiver ahead of him. So he is, he's decent hands, great overall receiver. He actually holds his own as a blocker, but his frame is a concern. Is he going to hold up 5'11", 182? And is he going to be an every down player because he's a returner as well and very good at it? So you really get into this mid part of this wide receiver group, and it makes you wonder, hey, we don't have to grab one of these top wide receivers because there's a lot of talent available later, and we'll talk about more of them here as we go on. Your Sammy Coates and Devin Funches, those kind of guys. But from a fantasy perspective, if you're picking, if you have a couple picks at the end of round 1, or maybe a few second round picks, you're going to get some interesting. You're going to have some interesting options in your rookie draft.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is a great year for that. And these speedster guys that I love Lockett. I was another show this earlier this week, just sort of glowing about this kid because he's not on the bigger side, but he plays big. He goes out and plays the game. You would be surprised when you watch the games and then you find out that he's 5'10", 5'11". You'd think he's more in the 6'1", 6'2" range. He's a player that I have my eye on, and he's a player who will very likely be a day 2 player, whereas Smith, Dorsett, they could be one players. They certainly could, both of them. Another guy right in the area in my rankings, and honestly did not have him this high until after the combine, just because I didn't realize what kind of wheels he had, was Chris Conley, putting up a 4.35 at the combine for 6'3". I mean, pretty impressive there, though. He did have some issues throughout the season playing for Georgia last year. So, maybe the talent as a receiver isn't necessarily to where the athleticism is, but he still could be one of those players. Again, Mike, you make the best point. This is a year to just, if you can grab draft picks, load up, especially second rounders, late first round, if you can get somebody to part with one, but second rounders, there's going to be a lot of fantasy relevant players out of that second round bunch. And then, we still go down the list further. You mentioned Funches. I'm not very high on Funchess. I think Funchess is a one-trick pony. I think he's a poor man's Marcus Colston, who all he can do is play that big slot position, and he's not going to be designated as a tight end very likely. So that means that you're going to get at best back end wide receiver 2 in PPR leagues, but for the most part, he's not going to offer very much upside. But there are other players in that sort of tier there. So now as we work our way down, sort of tier 3, tier 4 guys, DeAndre Smelter, who had an ACL, Vince Maley, potentially Trey McBride, the small schooler from William and Mary, which is a school I have heard of before. I'm looking, Funchess, of course, in there. Maybe even some of these deeper guys like Devontae Davis, Justin Hardy, Kenny Bell, Rashad Green. This list is insane. So who's popping off that list for you? I mean, I'm sort of Trey McBride certainly is one of the players who sticks out on that list. But any of those players sticking out for you?
Yeah, and well, first of all, Conley, I think he's kind of one of those guys. He feels destined for Seattle. He just seems like their kind of guy. He has the speed, but he's 6'2", 213. But you've heard him compared to Lockett, who's on that team. He's a lean receiver. He's a good blocker. He just seems like for some reason that kind of guy is going to land in a team, in a team like that in Seattle. But touching on some other intriguing names, you mentioned Smelter. I think the torn ACL late last year is going to have people down on him. Even when he lands on a team, you're going to see stories about him maybe going on the PUP list or not playing right out of the gate. That's going to make him drop in value. I think he's a nice sleeper. He has the upside to be, a top 10 receiver in his class, maybe even top 5. Went to Georgia Tech. He has size 6'3", 226. He's a great blocker. He's a good receiver. He's decent hands. I mean, he's just strictly an outside receiver. You're going to get big plays out of him. So he's an intriguing guy to me. 2 others, Kenny Bell. I won't talk too much on him, but he's a guy all around pretty good player. I've seen him compared to Kenny Stills, who obviously has been terrific at the NFL level. Maybe a candidate to replace him in New Orleans. We'll see what happens there. And then last guy, I have to talk about this guy. I feel like this is I almost hate to say this because it makes him sound bad, but it's almost like when you were looking at Stephen Hill when he came in, except for a lot later in the draft. You can almost get this guy maybe for free, but in the last couple of rounds. Darren Waller, Georgia Tech, ran a 4.46. He's 6'6" and 232. He has good hands. He rates out well as an overall receiver. He had a great grade last year. He's a good blocker. I just look at him and I see typical Georgia Tech raw incoming receiver. We've seen them before, and the first couple were pretty good. Demarius Thomas and who am I missing there? Calvin.
I knew Calvin Johnson.
Yeah, first it was Calvin, then it was Demarius. They worked out pretty good. Stephen Hill, not so much, but I feel like Waller's the next guy in line. This huge, big wide receiver that comes from that offense. But he was good. He's not getting the attention, but there was also talk that he could be used similar to the Funchess concern that he could end up playing tight end. That's something to keep an eye on. See where I feel like he'll probably be a 6th, 7th rounder, maybe see what that team designates him as. But he's a guy that I'm really intrigued by, and I think that's one of them kind of late round sleepers you'll look at, especially because hey, if he earns a number 3 job, number 4 job, he's going to see a lot of targets down near the end zone.
Yeah, he 6 of 26 catches last year were touchdowns. So that's like the prototype, jump ball receiver. And I do have him ranked, player 2 that I should mention just because I think he's going to fly way under the radar. He's even going to fly under the radar for the draft, but he has the potential to be one of those players. People last year, look, like how many of us were talking about John Brown before the draft, even after the draft, we weren't talking about John Brown. Now, I'm not saying that this guy's going to be John Brown, but one of the players who flies under the radar, you're ahead of the curve, you can grab him before your league mates. Austin Hill, Arizona, look at his production in 2012, okay? He put up some monster numbers in 2012, 1,364 yards, 11 touchdowns, and he tore his ACL in 2013. So last season was like that recovery season. And we know the recovery rate isn't the same for every player. Not everybody is Adrian Peterson and can just come back after a few months and play at that high level. So maybe we see Hill taking that step forward as he joins a pro roster. He'd be a player who I would definitely take a flyer on later in drafts. And Mike, we only have a couple minutes left here, but
well,
we don't really
need much. Hold on.
Okay.
before tight end, I just like running back. I have to throw some cold water on some players.
Oh yeah, let's do it.
Deontay Greenberry, Dress Anderson, two popular guys that are, they're towards the bottom of most running wide receiver ranks. But guys,
Yeah.
you're going to hear it could be a sleeper. Should I throw a flyer at him? Both guys were really bad last year at the collegiate level. Greenberry went to Houston. He runs a 4.5, not overly speedy. His hands not very good. He worked mostly from the slot, so that's even more of a concern. I'm not looking at depth of target, but I assume it was low considering he was in the slot so often. He did not rate well as a receiver. He's not a good blocker. And the same thing with Dress Anderson. I've seen him quite a bit. Not too big. He's 6'1", 187, so very lean, like a Chris Givens type player. Again, hands are bad. Not a very good receiver. He can't block very well. More of an outside receiver there. But both of those guys, you're going to hear their names. Those are guys I would say stay away from.
Yeah, and Greenberry, he saw 135 targets last year too. So like just the volume, 72 catches for 841 yards. And the fact that he didn't get invited to the combine, he needed another year in college, really did, and didn't take that year. So he'll end up getting drafted very likely. He'll be on people's rankings. Hey, he's on my top 50. I'd be remiss not to mention him, but he's at the very bottom of that top 50. So yeah, he's a player that there's a bit of a hype machine there for him. I couldn't agree more with that one. But like I said, we don't need much time for the tight ends. It's pretty obvious. Max Williams, everybody has him, as the top tight end in this class. I don't even really think we need to talk about him at this point. We'll save that conversation for after the draft, depending on where he lands. Good size. He's a tight end. He's what you would want out of a tight end. TE2, we see rookies not really performing at that. You don't see a rookie come in like Odell Beckham Jr. and just light it on fire. So you draft him with that expectation. But are there any other tight ends that you're looking at that you see that might potentially have fantasy value in the short or long term?
Well, like we touched on with running back, there's a lot of openings right now, and there's a lot of incoming. Conveniently, there's a lot of incoming running backs. The opposite is the case at tight end. There's not much talent, and conveniently, there's not many openings. You look at the Saints and the Ravens. They really stand out as the two teams who need a tight end, and Baltimore may not if Dennis Pitta comes back. New Orleans, you can pretty much pencil in Josh Hill there as a borderline tight end one, because even if they draft Williams, a possibility late in the first round, you said it, rookie tight ends just don't do a lot of damage. So it's going to take a while for these guys to get going. Clive Walford, outstanding receiver. I mean, he's really the other one that stands out. Similar, built almost exactly the same as Williams, ran almost the exact same 40. Maybe not as good as a blocker, but a terrific receiver. And sleeper, he's ranked low by a lot of people, but Nick O'Leary, Florida State, was pretty good at the collegiate level. One of the few guys, you look down this list of tight ends who are going to be drafted, not many good receivers. There really are. None of these guys really jump out as good receivers, but Williams, Wofford, and O'Leary, terrific wide receivers. All three have decent size, not massive, but decent size. So I think O'Leary will be a nice late round flyer if you're a team that is looking for that in your rookie draft. So the only other one probably Jesse James, 6'6". He's interesting because he's big, but I don't think any of these other guys are going to be really good receivers at the pro level.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on O'Leary, whose grandfather is Jack Nicklaus, the golfer. So he's a Golden Bear. Yeah, it certainly kind of has a Dallas Clark. I think that's what he looks like to me when he's on the field. Not massive in size, but a capable receiver. Go back and when you watch Jameis, you're going to see a lot of O'Leary from last year, the year before. By the way, folks, if you're asking for trade advice and you say, should I trade Jay Hill for so-and-so? Please clarify, because I think you mean Jeremy Hill every time you ask me. So I was like, yeah, you're getting Jeremy Hill. Do it. Like Josh Hill. Okay, that makes more sense now. So just clarify. Maybe we got to come up with a name for him, nickname or something. One other tight end before we get out of here today, who certain people have been talking about, is James O'Shaughnessy. And the reason why he's sort of flying way under the radar is he's another small schooler, Illinois State. Last year, he put up 9 touchdowns and he averaged 18.8 yards per catch. Now, I don't know what his average depth target was. We don't have that data because he just didn't play against enough FBS schools, the bigger schools. So Relatively unknown. I would say that his draft stock is really going to, or his draft, his slot where he gets picked, what round he gets picked, what team he goes to would really impact whether or not I decide to rank him after the draft. So he's a name. Just pay attention to over the next couple days as the draft comes. The draft's coming tomorrow, baby. Can't wait. Mike, closing thoughts on this class? Anything?
I just think what you have to watch is where them running backs land. I think there's going to, like I said, there's probably 5 teams who need a number one running back, even if you include a team like Atlanta or Arizona who has a committee option there in Freeman and Ellington, a guy who can join a committee. But, all these teams need a number one, and I just can't wait to see where these running backs land, because as soon as they, that pick is announced, follow us on Twitter. We're going to be doing live projections. I'll be doing live offense and updating the site. Jeff will be doing the same Friday. We'll have the live blog at PFF. You're probably about to say all this, but I'm stealing your thunder.
That's awesome.
But we're going to be on top of it, and we're going to tell you what you need to know about these guys. The same kind of concept of wide receiver, but especially running back, just because there's so many fantasy relevant openings. You're going to see rookies all over early round draft boards this year, especially those guys we talked about at the top. So I just can't wait to see where they land tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. Tomorrow night, Friday night, all day Friday. Saturday. Yeah, all day Saturday, too. There's going to be fantasy relevant players coming off board on day 3. We're going to be live blogging that whole thing. So, of course, you're following us on Twitter. But check in on that live blog. Instant reactions, instant expectations, instant projections. And then we're going to come back here at least on Thursday night, and we're going to do a sort of instant reaction roundtable with some of the other staffers. So, I mean, you're getting double the dose of Fantasy Slant this week. It's only fitting because we're getting insane amount of football. There's no better time in the year. Remember, if you're not subscribing yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. Take advantage of that DraftKings deal and get over to our site and subscribe, because pretty soon that paywall is going to go up, and you're going to want access to all this data, all this information, and you can't get it anywhere else, folks. So, I think that's going to do it for us this week. It's too much to talk about, but we'll be back on Thursday night, like I said, and then especially next week after we've processed everything. Same day of the week, Wednesday, and boy, we're going to have even more to talk about then. We might have to do a double-length show for that one. But until then, for Pro Football Focus, he's Mike, I'm Jeff, and that's a wrap.